Dennis Ganzha joined CFC Big Ideas in 2019 and advanced rapidly from being an intern to becoming the co-CEO now. Dennis has also founded an NGO public diplomacy platform which worked closely with the Ukrainian government on youth policy projects. The NGO set up more than 20 projects in nearly all regions of Ukraine and cooperated with such international partners as USAID and many, many others. In 2021 to 23, Dennis served as Ukrainian Youth Delegate to the UN and participated in Ukraine's diplomatic efforts at the UN. Also, Dennis served as a part of the Youth Affairs Council under the President of Ukraine. He's also appeared in many international media, such as the BBC, Sky News, CNN, Al Jazeera, and so on. And I saw you pop up on Times Radio as well. That was an interesting sort of interview. Dennis has also worked in the Ukrainian front lines as a frontline producer of media content and analysis. Well, we're going to dig into all of these experiences. But first of all, Dennis, welcome to the channel.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, for inviting me.
Well, we met and we had some fantastic conversations at the Odessa Black Sea Security Forum. But before we get into all of that, I should mention to the audience, you've hardly got any sleep last night. Could you explain the situation?
So, as we are talking today, and I think it's important to mention that it's 6th of June, Russians have done, I would say, one of the most useless, barbaric attacks on Ukraine. From my personal experience, I'm living in Kyiv for nearly the 3 years already. I'm originally from Kharkiv, which is, of course, more severely hit, but this attack on Kyiv, I think the only reason for this attack, it was not actually getting some targets. It was actually to cause some terrorism on civilians because the number of noise and the number of explosions, which lasted, I think the whole attack started at 10 p.m. and finished nearly at 4, and Russians used all the types of missiles they have. They used tens and tens of Shahed drones, Iranian developed. And the attack itself, because we are all following the news after the recent successful operation by the security defense forces of Ukraine, when we hit the strategic Russian aviation. And of course, this is something which will go in the history books of the special operations. And after hitting the Crimean Bridge, and they are, it's all around the news that they want to do some kind of reply to that, but they never reply. They just cause terror. So me myself, I get barely any sleep. I stayed in the shelter with my wife and my dog until 4 a.m. And after a bunch of COVID feast, of course, I'm happy to join Jonathan in this podcast because I think the biggest thing me and every Ukrainian can do, despite everything, not stop working daily, do our job, pay our taxes, support our military, and speaking, of course, to the friends of Ukraine, which I think Jonathan really is, and I hope that all of you listening are also true friends of Ukraine.
I think that's absolutely. I mean, there are a few trolls, obviously, with every video. But even on this even on this channel, the trolls seem to be a little more polite than in other places because they know that, like the blood cells in a body, the audience will turn on obvious trolls. They have to, maintain a civilized tone, even if what they say is nonsense. I try not to use words like retaliation, etc., because that almost implies a sort of two-siding, that somehow this is a war and Ukraine and Russia are fighting, blah, 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 and there's no real difference. Of course, in the scenario, there is an attacker and there is a defender, there is an aggressor and there is a victim. So when Ukraine strikes Russian military targets, that is a form of defense. But in the media, we see words like escalation and retaliation used. We see narratives that seem to normalize or blur the line between aggressor and defender. As someone who is an expert in media communications and with a sharp mind, does the sort of subtlety of this language, do you feel that? And does it anger you, quite simply? It angers me. I wonder if it has the same effect on you.
You know, like, of course, I do understand why maybe people are saying that things because they don't want us sometimes to analyze, and there are a bunch of medias around which are, of course, not so big supporters of Ukraine. Maybe sometimes they have ties to Russia, and of course, Russia is doing really good with their propaganda on Europeans, on Asians and Africans, on Latin Americans. And the amount of money they invest to spread their narrative, you see that it's working. Because I do think that all these things you mentioned, they were actually set up by some kind of pro-Russian media channels or pro-Russian paid journalists all around the news. And we've already tracked so many news about Ukraine that they sometimes started in some kind of no-name Nigerian newspaper, which no one actually reads. And then it goes viral all around the news. So for me, hearing things like that is, you know, just follow this. Since the very first attack of Ukraine on Russia, on the Russian territory, you haven't seen, at least I don't recall, real civilian casualties because of Ukrainian drone hitting the target. There were maybe some casualties because Russians, they just can't normally use their anti-drone systems or anti-missile systems, and they're not working properly. But you have never seen us targeting directly the civilian infrastructure. You have seen us targeting the military infrastructure, targeting energy infrastructure, which is creating money for Russia to pay for this war. And this is what I think is the thing here, because even the today's attack, they haven't hit any real military targets, at least is what is of our knowledge. They have hit civilian buildings. They killed three emergency service workers. And for what? Because they have so many drones, they have so many rockets, and why you're using them to hit civilians? Because we're using everything we have to make sure that we decrease the Russian capability to attack us. We are making sure that they don't have the capacity to prepare for the next big wars. And hearing something like that, when someone is saying that this is an escalation, we've passed this already. Remember 2022, when even considering the first fact of giving Ukraine the Western weapons, everybody was calling this will cause escalation, this will cause escalation. There is no more room for escalation for Russia. They have already done anything except for sending nukes, of course, but they will never do that, my guess. They have already did everything. They killed many civilians. They sent every single rocket they have to us. So there is no more room for escalation, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. We just need to do peace through strength.
It's like the memes, isn't it? Be very careful, Ukraine, because Russia might declare war on you, you know.
We are joking about that every day. Like, when someone is saying that Russia will hit hard, and I'm asking, oh, so the war will start.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Um, let's keep on that because the lesson, of course, from World War II, and this worked both ways actually. The lesson from World War II in hitting civilian targets does not achieve the objectives. Um, Either civilians buckle down and align with their regime rather than resisting it, or you sort of break their will to resist anything and they're just living to survive. Either way, history shows that bombardment of civilian targets never ends wars and never ends regimes that actually initiate those wars. It's only targeting the means with which those wars are really engaged. That would be sort of the military equipment, supplies, and logistics. and also the economic foundations that allow regimes to commit war. So, what is Russia doing here? This seems to have the character almost of a psychopath. It has an element of senselessness because strategically, now tell me if I'm wrong, it seems to me that hitting Ukrainian civilians is not going to change anyone's mind. It's not going to convince anyone that they need to capitulate to the Russian world.
I would at some point disagree with you, but you will understand later. It's actually changing minds. So I'm originally from the Kharkiv region. It's very close to Russia. You've heard most probably that many of our cities around Kharkiv, they were temporarily occupied, and there are still fightings going on in the Kharkiv Oblast. We call region as Oblast.
I was in
And
Slavyansk just a few weeks ago, and of course that was occupied by Gherkin, I think, in the early days of
yeah,
the.
but that's
Yeah.
that's Donetsk region. So I'm
Yes.
from Kharkiv, and it's like mostly Izum, Kupiansk, Vovchansk. And you see, historically, we are very close to Russia because, we had this USSR past. Many people have their relatives in the neighborhood regions of Russia. And because of the Ukrainian economy is not so prosperous, and the western part of Ukraine, they were mostly traveling to Europe, to Poland, to Hungary, to Slovakia, and many other countries. When us from Kharkiv, which is 1,000 kilometers plus from European border, people were doing trade with Russia. And thus, of course, when everything started, Kharkiv in the Russian plan was one of the cities to create just another proxy republic like Donetsk and Luhansk, but they never succeeded. And I recall this last several months prior to the full-scale invasion, then of course everyone was already talking about what is going to happen. And I'm sorry to say that, but many of, okay, they're not friends, they're like more of acquaintances. They were actually saying that we are okay with Russian flag over Kharkiv, that we don't care. You see, that Kharkiv people, they are not separatists. They're just in their identity. They're first of all Kharkiv people and then only Ukrainians. It was prior to the 2022. But the moment Russia started the full-scale invasion, the moment they sent, I remember this, the first rocket to destroy a civilian building in Chuhuiv, which is 15 kilometers from Kharkiv, I've seen all of these people who were yesterday, I would say, more Russia leaning, changing their minds totally and started supporting Ukraine in the hardest way you ever seen. Many of them actually joined the army. Many of them became volunteers. And if you come today to Kharkiv, you would barely find a person who would say a good thing about Russia because Kharkiv suffered so much. And you see, in a very strategic way, let's also recall some parts of Ukrainian politics prior to the full-scale invasion. If you find some kind of polls back to December 2021, January 2022, you would see that the ruling party and Zelensky himself, they were losing support. They were actually decreasing in the number of support. Because if you recall, in 2019, Zelensky won the elections with outrageous 73% of votes, which never happened in Ukrainian history before. And so there is a pro-Russian party in our parliament, opposition platform for life, it's called. It's run by many people who are under sanctions already. We had some rising stars of Ukrainian politics like Razumkov, like Murayev, which were somewhat more Russian leaning at that point. They were like more that we need to do peace with Russia, grant more access, more rights to Russian speaking people. And my guess, My guess, and I'm really sorry to say that, but if they not to start this full-scale invasion, most probably the next parliament will be 30 or 40% more Russia-leaning than European-leaning. And in several years, they will achieve even more because we were not seeing so many support from the EU, UK, US. We were not receiving all these weapons. We were not receiving all this economic support. And of course, we were not even hoping in our biggest dreams that one day Ukraine will actually become the member of the EU and NATO during our lives.
And of course, NATO is practically off the table at this point, and it makes it appear as if it was a pretense that it was ever on the table. In fact, the EU, somewhat more serious and realistic, I guess. I don't know what the perspective is on the ground. I've met many Ukrainians who, especially those who are, say, of a slightly more nationalist persuasion, that there are several Ukrainians that I've spoken to that are vehemently anti-EU. You know, they could be compared to Brexiters in this country with their intensity of their hatred. But also in that sense, I kind of detect maybe some Russian amplified narratives in that as well. Um, yeah, I don't know what the majority think there, or whether such data sort of has been redone recently.
Yeah, it's been redone. I think the recent polls are showing that there is still a big support. Like it's for sure among 50%. I don't recall the actual numbers that Ukrainians are supporting the idea of joining the EU. Ukrainians are supporting the idea of joining NATO. Of course, there is some skepticism around, and it's mostly caused by sometimes this very slow pace from our partners. It's not even the lack of support. You are supporting us in one of the best ways you could have ever done. But sometimes we just want you to be more fast in what you're doing because we are just living in different paces. Because right now,
This
as
is
we are
very
talking,
Ukrainian as well, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, like,
Ukrainians in Britain get so frustrated with the slowness of
ah,
everything.
yeah, like, come on, Jonathan, it's June the 6th. And in a month, me as a businessman, I would never reach a single person in the EU or US in the US to do business because you will have vacations. Me, most probably not, because I need to work. The war is not over. I need to pay my taxes to fund my army to fight the war. And that's the difference.
That's it. And yes, if anyone's done business in Europe, you know that August is just well, that's it. You know, don't count on closing any deals in August or even having any meetings or calls potentially. That's not universal. Some people will take calls on their vacation, but they're quite clearly on vacation and doing you a favor. And it's weird from the British perspective because yes, we'll take some holidays, but we won't take, you know, the whole of August or even July off. We're a little closer to the Americans in that sense, with a sort of work culture there. But at the same time, we don't have that sense of urgency. We don't have that sense of needing to get somewhere fast. Now, when it comes to civilian tasks, okay, that's a frustration. When it comes to fixing things, building things, doing things, it's a frustration. When it comes to war, it's a matter of life and death, quite literally. What it also means, it seems to me, is that if certain equipment isn't supplied, and you went on Times Radio 2 years ago to sort of talk about this, when equipment such as tanks or F-16s or long-range equipment is not supplied or restrictions are not lifted in a timely fashion, it means that strategic opportunities are lost. It's not just, you know, losing lives, it's the ability to inflict significant blows on the enemy are lost or reduced.
And unfortunately, this is happening from day to day. Like, I followed so many stories that partners have said us not to do this. Like you recall the Kherson liberation when we were actually close to cutting 30,000 Russian troopers into a trap, which doesn't mean we will kill them all. We will most probably take some of them captive and exchange for our POVs. but there was a command from the US to let them go. You could not imagine this in any war that someone is saying that don't take your enemy, just let them go. You cannot imagine this. You cannot imagine anyone saying to the country at war, don't hit this, don't use that. And you see, that's why, getting back to this successful operation, which was done this Sunday, we've done it with our own means. And because of that, maybe, I'm guessing, we never know, the history will tell. But maybe because of that, the weaponry infrastructure and the industry in Ukraine is developing so rapidly because we need our own solutions, not to rely on anyone. Yes, we would not sustain in this war without partners. And I would say this out loud for anyone. Thank you. Thank you 1,000 times for everything you're doing, but you're not doing enough for us to win this war. And that's why sometimes we need to find our own ways. And that's why I love my people and I'm still staying in this country to make sure that we win this and we bring this potential to other spheres, to the normal spheres of life which are not connected to war.
And we see what happened last week as a classic example of that. Now, I don't know when the Kursk incursion happened, which was just almost a year ago now. Whether US counterparts were informed or not, whether the British were informed at all, because I know the military liaison with the British is a little perhaps closer and often forms an intermediary link between Ukraine and the US. I don't know to what extent the Kursk incursion was communicated because one can see Sullivan, Biden panicking about that and seeking to put a stop on it. The same with the strikes against Russian oil infrastructure. And indeed, there have been significant pauses in that operation, not because it strategically makes sense in the context of the war, but because it defers to internal political processes, especially in the US. That strikes me as morally wrong that a partner should demand and expect that. Then we come to the strikes last week on Russia's strategic aviation. Now, I think it's been confirmed that partners were not informed. Um, yeah, there may be some nuance behind that, but generally speaking, Trump and his administration were certainly not informed of that operation that was taking place, and indeed the weaponry that was used is Ukrainian ingenuity, Ukrainian innovation, and Ukrainian plan, ingenious plan. Is this the kind of thing you're talking about? Home-sourced, end-to-end operations without deferring to partners is perhaps the only way to push back against Russia and get out of this idea that everything is escalatory, defending yourself is escalatory, victory is escalatory.
You know, ask yourself a question. What is more expensive for us? And I'm not speaking in the currency means. I'm speaking about in the terms of people's lives. And yes, also, okay, the economy, because right now the whole Europe is spending billions and billions of euros on rearming. Won't it be cheaper just to give Ukrainian everything to make sure that Russia does not have the capacity to actually pose any threat to Europe and the free world? And that's, I think, the question which is not asked sometimes in the White House and maybe in other big offices, because everyone is still hoping to do some business with Russia. You've seen that for many years, Germany was corrupted with the Russian money to build all these pipelines to receive the cheap energy. And they think the world is just not prepared to the world without Russia as a big partner in any means, like in economic matters or in other things. And that's why maybe people, I think they're not afraid of us winning. They're just afraid of Russia losing because you can't imagine right now how the world without Russia will look like.
Because they fear it'll disappear, it'll fragment, it'll collapse, etc. I saw these same headlines in 1992. I'd just come back from Moscow and I came back to the UK and the headlines were screaming, there'll be civil war in Russia. I came back and I just, no, they won't. You literally don't understand the first thing about how that country works. And, you haven't been there. Or even if the correspondents have been there, many of them will exist in a kind of Western bubble, feeding off their own kind of narratives and false ideas. And I think it's the same now. So, from a position of a Western apparatchik, as it were, if we're hard on Russia now, then we might lose out on the chance to have business with Russia later. All these nightmare scenarios of a collapse. However, it'd be interesting, to hear your views. My point of view here is that actually being tough on Russia, showing strength, means we would be more likely in future to do business with them. They will be desperate for, that business one way or another, and actually a clean defeat for Russia will bring that about faster, and it won't necessarily affect their willingness to do business in the future at all. In fact, they will see you as a stronger future partner if you show strength now. If you show implacable strength against them, they will realize that you're a partner that you don't mess around with. Turkey behaves this way. When jets violated Turkish airspace, it warned them, and then it shot them down. Has Russia stopped doing business with Turkey? Absolutely not. Has it stopped Russians going on holiday to Turkey? Absolutely not.
Jonathan, one thing I don't want to be perceived here as the guy who advocates for partnering up with Russia, because me as a Ukrainian, I will never do this. And even being a businessman, I never worked with companies which never left Russian market. Because that's the point of the principle. I lost too many friends and I have seen too many destructions of my country. So I don't even want to think for a single second that someone will partner up with them in 5 or 10 years because it's not about the money, it's the values which we must think here. But asking your question and getting to the point, yes, they don't understand anything except for strength. Because you see, that's the reason why Putin and his puppets are running the country, because they have shown total strength that to their so-called nation, they're actually, I hope, will be one day a bunch of free and independent nations on the territory, which is called these days Russian Federation. But actually, that's the only language these people understand. They don't understand it because they will always find a way to treat you, to bribe you, to make you, how you call it, make you treated badly. Like,
Complicit in their crimes. I think that maybe.
yeah, they will always be bad on you. They will never do anything for a win-win partnership as we as normal people do. They will only do it for their own personal gain until you show them their place.
That's absolutely right. I think that's the fundamental understanding there. The win-win concept doesn't exist in what is essentially a power vertical or a vertical of trauma and abuse. I think power vertical is far too neutral a phrase for what that is. Um, Now Ukraine. I mean, well, let's turn to Ukraine. And as you say, Ukraine has a win-win concept. It has, I would say, the mentality of a society, the culture of a society that's been through some of the extraordinary revolutionary processes of European history, whether that be the Enlightenment, Reformation, Renaissance, etc., and even through industrialization and post-industrialization, Ukraine is, in essence, close to Europe. So you described that process where perhaps it was drawing, or pro-Russian politicians were sort of, gaining strength prior to the full-scale war. But the underlying DNA of Ukraine strikes me as being completely different from Russia, and it shares big chunks of that DNA code with European culture.
I have a story to tell you that a very good friend of mine, once made a big poster on Maidan. It was just after the last revolution, Revolution of Dignity. And there was written, freedom is our religion. And that's what Russians, they just don't understand about us, that we love freedom so much that we will never accept any single term which is taking the freedom from us. And saying that, that's why we also value others' freedom. We understand that, this concept that my freedom ends where your freedom starts. And we totally understand this concept that's why we understand democracy. And that's why we want to lean to the normal world run by normal rules with no dictatorship, with not Soviet style things, but just doing things in a normal way. Yes, we have some things which are not so good about us. We totally have them, as any nation has. But in the core of our national identity, you will only find this big, big word, freedom.
And it seems to me as well, this is I didn't understand this so straight away. Um, Freedom can exist, on pieces of paper and constitutions and so on. It can exist in courts of law and all these things. And of course, when you have an old and mature democracy, it seems one can rely on these mechanisms of democracy more and more, almost as it reaches a kind of, I would say, an old age. And unfortunately, what it seems to me Ukraine shows is that democracy is that, but these things have to evolve. It also has to be part of a living culture, and part of that living culture also needs to include an element of instability, an element of challenge and change, and even revolution, because you cannot rely on just things written down. It seems to me that that is what Ukraine can actually teach the West. It can reinvigorate it with a kind of living essence of democracy that's in flux. As a Ukrainian, how would you express that or feel that?
History tells better than me. We don't like something, we gather at Maidan. Tomorrow we have just another power here. We don't like something, we go to Maidan. That's the thing. My office is like 300 meters from Maidan, and I'm feeling that very real here every day because you see, we don't like something, we just go and do this. Maybe it's also some kind of problem for us as Ukrainians because unfortunately, and I need to say this, that we sometimes, because we love freedom so much and because these all leaders of ours, it's hard for us sometimes to unite. Because, I come from the civil society world prior to joining business, and on every topic, you have free associations. They have nearly the same name, they do the same job, but it's just they have free associations. And because Ukrainians love freedom so much, it's hard for you to unite for us. I'm coming into business and now I'm seeing nearly the same thing that we have free associations, nearly called the same, doing the same job, but it's just other people. And that's, of course, also a problem for us because, yes, when we need to defend the collective freedom, the freedom of the whole nation, you have already seen it. February 2022 has broken everyone's expectations because we understood that there is someone who is not allowing us to fight each other on these issues of associations, who gains what. You don't dare engaging into our own stuff because we want to do this freely. That's our country. We do whatever we want with it.
We want the freedom to fight each other. How dare you interrupt
Yes.
that? Yeah.
We like it so much, like my personal life, I was engaged in some, back in student life, overthrowing the student's dean, fighting for the dean of my school to become a leader of the faculty of the school. That's just in our blood. But when someone like Russia, they entered us, oh, here we are united, like, and that's, that's the problem of us, because even right now, when you see, unfortunately, not every single person in this country is feeling that this is a big threat already, because yes, we have these night attacks, but still the front line is far from us. And yes, we are already engaged in many of our internal fights, but that's our internal fights. And we don't ask Russia, and that's crazy about, you most probably have read this memorandum which Russian delegation passed to Ukrainians, yeah?
Yes, yes. I even read Putin's, bullshit historical thesis back in 2021. And you have to read their words because, like any good Bond villain, they tell you what they're going to do, and you ignore their words at your peril. I mean, many Western media and analysts sort of brush these things off. But, for instance, when I read the historical memorandum or whatever it was, the philosophical treatise that supposedly Putin wrote, I'm like, oh my God, he's going to invade. He is absolutely going to invade. And then when you see the memorandum of what they're demanding, uh, then it's still the capitulation, the total emasculation and capitulation of Ukraine. It's nothing more nor less than that. They're still sinking.
There is the big issue with the Russians that they historically they think that they are the big brother who is taking care of you. They're not. And even these people who we like to call good Russians, which are anti-Putin, something like that, when they dare, even prior to full-scale invasion, come to Kiev, talk on some liberal forums, they were trying to teach us how to do democracy. Russians, really, they are trying to teach us. They were not even capable of overthrowing a regional governor. Who are you talking to, people? To Ukrainians who know how to overthrow the president. And
Multiple times, yes.
that's in their core. They like to teach anyone because they think they're right in everything. And that's why I think there is something in this crazy psychopath's mind, who's named Putin. He doesn't understand that he will never kill the spirit of Ukrainians because it just doesn't fit in his view of the world, where everyone is supporting him, where everyone is, like emperor. And because Ukrainians, we know how to normally talk to people and get them saying the normal things, not with the war. He's just afraid of us. He's just afraid of this mindset of freedom. He's not accepting it for a second.
I wonder if even thinks it's real. I mean, in his KGB training, in his mindset that is full of distrust, that is full of envy, you know, being brought up in the sort of dvor, having to sort of fight and hurt other people, and possibly getting some enjoyment out of that, as well as it being a survival mechanism. Um, I think he probably fails to understand that the whole world doesn't operate along these same rules. It's a kind of total lack of comprehension. Um, but Ukraine, therefore, is good at this thing called soft power. It perhaps could be better. It perhaps could project this far more strongly because what Ukraine has is a strong, organic, innovative culture, and it's one that can work internationally. That's why I look forward to the future and sort of seeing Ukraine as a great world culture in multiple domains, whether it be cinema or animation, in music, art, all sorts of areas. Um, how, in the context of war, could this be used better? Because you've been, within the UN, you've done various sort of youth projects. You will have come across people from around the world who may be civil to you personally, but who are steeped in Russian narratives. And let's not forget, we have been talking about the dark side of Russia. Well, Russia is actually very good at projecting a false image of itself around the world and especially into other countries. And it utilizes its resources to bribe and coerce people to become its friends. We know how that works. And they work on a zero-sum game. Whatever harms our adversary is good for us. So if they can turn countries like India and so on, and South Africa to be able to reproduce, their propaganda, then of course it's beneficial because that damages, Western relations with these countries as well. What's your experience and what's your solution to this, given, the strength that is inherent, I think, in Ukrainian culture?
You know, of course, the first biggest thing we are facing as a country, and speaking about our culture, it took us to fight this war to finally many people understand that Ukrainian culture is not the part of Russian culture. Because this is what they have been doing for centuries. They have been stealing our culture from us. They have been, writing our achievements into their history. And of course, right now, and let's be blunt on this, for many, many people around the world, Ukraine appeared on the map on the 24th of February of 2022. And, we only had 3 point some months, years to at least show ourselves to the world. And of course, when we are speaking that we are really lacking resources to spread the word about us, because Russia just have the budgets to throw the money to showcase their so-called culture, to buy people to support them. And Ukraine does not have this. And first of all, we can't compete in resources with Russia for now. And this is speaking about also the propaganda, the culture, and everything. We just don't have the budgets, at least to showcase the culture we have. And at the same time, you see, at some point, we Ukrainians right now are passing a very important test inside as a nation. What is our national identity really is? Because I've talked before that there was a big problem with people from Kharkiv, first of all, calling themselves Kharkiv people, but not Ukrainians. And right now, our national identity is being formed, and maybe and we need some years to showcase our culture. We need some years to to pass our internal test. And maybe only after that, we will really start competing with so-called Russian culture. Not, don't understand me right. Competing in quantity, not quality.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's all in the packaging and the investment. As a marketing person, um, actually the core of what they've got either doesn't matter. It's how you package it up, how you project it around the world. And unfortunately, we still see that happening here, even in Britain, which is extremely pro-Ukrainian. We still see someone like Nitrebka, the Putin supporting Russian opera singer, although she's got a history of suing people who say she's a Putin supporter, despite multiple photographic evidences of her
So
appearing with him.
you will
Uh,
get a lawsuit after this podcast.
I hope not. I hope not. But she is, I don't know if it's still going ahead, but she was invited to appear at the Royal Opera in London. Um, that of course is disgraceful. I mean, people should, I think, make a conscious effort to platform Ukrainians. If there is a choice here of, platforming, Russians or somebody else, you should always go at this point for somebody else. It's just the time is not right to try to normalize or rehabilitate. And also, the time is not right to fail to recognize that Russian culture has, it's indivisible from politics. Now, let's turn to another experience there, because your work with NGOs, at some point certainly has had some input from USAID. And if we're talking about soft power, it seems that US has done an immense act of self-harm as well as, damage to its position in the world and created a vacuum for things like Russian culture, Chinese, CCP to enter that space by basically deconstructing USAID and not put forwarding, anything, I would say, to take its place. How's that affected, Ukraine, and the ability of, let's say, civic society to carry on doing what it does?
To make the long story short, because of course I can speak about that for hours, having a bunch of friends in civil society and stopping operations of my NGO. US has done a big, big favor, first of all, to China by doing that. Because what USAID has been doing, and there are many numbers which are showing that all the countries which USAID was operating in back in 20th century, out of 20 countries which were supported, 17 has become the strategic trade partners for the US, which means that it's not sometimes even an aid, it's an investment which you are giving to these countries to become a market economy, which is then getting Americans more prosperous and getting their pockets with more money. So, in the means of soft power, I think it's destroyed for years. Because the problem, even if imagine the situation tomorrow, everything resumes as it was. No one will ever put so many trust in Americans as they were doing before. I personally trusted so many things to wonderful American people who were supporting Ukraine within USAID. And today, if there is a proposal to work with them, I do understand that there is no guarantee that our cooperation will be done in the right way. Because the way they have done this, yes, there were problems within USAID. It was not an ideal system. And I was personally a fan of reforming USAID. And I talked to so many people inside on the high positions that, guys, the time is coming for you to change many things inside because, yes, there were many issues. But the way it was done, that in one day you stop all operations, you can't do anything, you can't even finish the contracts, the agreements, the projects you started. That was the biggest shot in your own leg done by the US in the means of soft power. And I know that, of course, China is already investing a bunch of money in countries around. There, even sometimes I hear rumors, only rumors, that they're in Ukraine proposing something. And if US is declaring China as its main opponent, I just don't understand why they have done this.
I think only in the fullness of time will we get some answers on this, and of course the chaos that sits behind it. We've only got a few minutes left. Let's end as I always try to end, and that is on a Ukrainian topic. And there can be nothing more Ukrainian than the role of civic society in the war. So this is another one of these two-part questions. One is, what's your assessment of the role of civic society in all its different permutations and forms from 2014? And the resistance to Russian aggression through to 2022. How critical is it not just to the survival of Ukraine, but to the sort of innovation we see taking place in tech, in drone warfare, and so on? Its ability to communicate with and to adapt to, say, the military and various other sectors. And I had a second part to that, so I'll cut that up because I've forgotten what the second part is. Oh, yes. And when it comes to Reconstruction, would it be actually incredibly dangerous if Western partners who understand so little about Russia and Ukraine were actually to put forward reconstruction programs that don't substantially include civic society and veterans organizations in the reconstruction process? It's my view this could be seriously damaging and destabilizing for Ukrainian democracy and freedom.
So let's get to the first thing. And me spent more than 5 years in civil society. Of course, I will only say good things because you see, one of the reasons Ukraine has responded so heavily in 2022 is because we are a horizontal society. Because someone knows someone in Lviv who knows someone in Kiev who can get this exact car to this exact guy from Kramatorsk. And it's just happening because you have horizontal connections, because the civil society has operated so well during all those years that it created the system which was capable of responding to the biggest threat at the cost to our nation. And this is the biggest role the civil society has really played because it connected so many people around. And, you know, this is what happened. We responded in a very good and the right way because we knew each other, and this trust was built, and it was built. A lot of things were done by civil society. And even today, you see that there is some wonderful organizations from civil society. I cannot but mention the technological forces of Ukraine, which are pushing the development of Ukrainian weaponry industry and is pushing the government to open the export of Ukrainian weaponry to other countries, which is so vital for our weaponry and our economy to develop. It's just one of the examples, and there are many, many of them when people are dedicating their lives to support the government to fight for the cause. Of course, everyone is talking about the possibility of there will be a big reconstruction, and it's very important that whoever enters Ukraine with the will to support reconstruction effort, whoever wants earn the money here, just support Ukraine. Of course, talking to civil society, especially veterans, is very and very important because you see there the veterans, which we already have a lot of them here and which we will have more under the end of atrocities. These are the most active people, the most capable people of doing things, because these are the ones who have taken the real guns in their hands. And these are the ones who created all these innovative ways to actually beat Russia in the battle. And not involving them will be a big, big loss for any project because they are the ones who deserve everything. It's not me sitting here in Kiev. Yes, I can say a lot of good things. I can volunteer, I can pay taxes. This is very nice. This is nothing compared to even being a soldier for a month. This is nothing. I am no one if not for them, because they are the people we must treat in the very best way. And it's our home task as Ukrainians, but it's also a home task for you, people around the globe, because these people right now, every single day, are making everything possible for you not to see nights like I seen today. It's a reality. You can face it in some years if we lose this war. We will never lose, of course. But let's imagine some kind of crazy world. If Ukraine is fallen, you are the next ones. And these people, they are the superheroes of our time. And we must treat them in the very best way. Me as a Ukrainian business, I hope I will have enough clients to pay the highest salaries to Ukrainian veterans in my company. US people who plan to involve here, always ask their opinion, always try to treat them that well because they have already deserved everything with them being in the fight in that exact moment.
Plus, they will have leadership skills that will bring extraordinary talent to their organizations, and it would be a waste not to tap into that ability to lead and command. Dennis, I know you have to rush. It's been a fantastic conversation. I'm very grateful to have met you in Odessa and to be, have the chance to initiate these conversations, one of which I hope will be more as well. For today, though, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.